Wild Fermentation, the Flavor, Nutrition, and Craft of Live Culture Foods, updated and revised edition by Sandor Elix Katz, Chapter 12, Vinegars. Most of my experience with vinegar making has been from wine making gone awry. I imagine that is how vinegar first came into being, for alcohol ferments left in contact with the oxygen-rich air inevitably develop bacteria of the genus Acetobacter, which digest alcohol into acetic acid, but only in the presence of oxygen. The word vinegar comes from the French word vinegar, vin, wine, and agar, sour. Pardon my French, I do not speak French. Vinegar is an excellent consolation for your winemaking failure. It's a preservative in its own right, healthful, with many delicious uses in cooking. There are different types of vinegar, generally distinguished by the source of the alcohol from which the vinegar is made. Wine vinegar is made from wine, apple cider vinegar from apple cider, rice vinegar from rice wine, malt vinegar from malted grain beverages, such as beer. Beyond these widely known styles, vinegar can be made from any fruit, like alcohol. Vinegar can be delicious and quite varied. Yet the cheapest and most commonly used vinegar is colorless and flavorless. Distilled white vinegar came from distilled alcohol diluted by water. First recipe, banana vinegar. No vinegar is easier or faster to make than banana vinegar, which pretty much makes itself. Just bananas and no other ingredients. Okay, so there's a recipe, and it calls for 3 overripe bananas. You will peel the bananas, mash the bananas into a pulp, ferment the bananas into a bowl covered with a cloth, stir frequently, renewing the surface to prevent surface growth, probably of mold. Observe the banana mash will begin to liquefy and ferment. Taste after a few days until the vinegar becomes sufficiently acidic. Strain out the solid remains and bottle in a narrow-necked, sealable bottle. Yummy! That's probably one of the only recipes I'm reading because it was very short. Wine vinegar. If a little homemade or commercial wine remains at the bottom of a bottle at the end of an evening, toss it into a non-reactive vessel with a broad surface area, such as a bowl, a crock, or a jar. Bear in mind that vinegar fermentation is an aerobic process that requires a steady flow of fresh air with oxygen. Ferment it in a wide, open vessel with a large surface area exposed to the air. Cover it with a cloth to keep out flies and particles, and store it out of direct light and away from alcohol fermentation projects. For best results, ferment the wine completely with an airlock before deliberately exposing it to aerobic vinegar organisms. Also, don't use vessels for vinegar making and wine making interchangeably. If one of your homemade wines turns out sour, call it vinegar and use it in cooking and salad dressings. My friend Hector Black, who planted an impressive blueberry orchard, makes blueberry wine vinegar in an oak barrel. His blueberry wine vinegar is thick and fruity. The barrel lays on its side to maximize the surface area in contact with the air. The hole in the barrel, the bunghole, is stuffed with cheesecloth. This year, Hector tried something new that he says sped up the process. He used a small electric air pump designed for an aquarium to pump air into the developing vinegar. Since the vinegar-making organisms are aerobic, this stimulates them and increases their action. The acidity of finished vinegar correlates with the alcohol content of the wine from which it was made, and with the sugar concentration of the original pre-fermented solution. The time it takes for wine to become vinegar will vary quite a bit, depending upon the type of sugar, alcohol content, temperature, and aeration. Figure roughly 1 to 3 weeks in summer and longer in the winter. Taste the vinegar periodically to monitor its progress. Once you can taste that most of the sweetness or alcohol has converted to acetic acid, bottle the vinegar in small, narrow-neck bottles that seal tightly. If living vinegar is not protected from oxygen, then it can begin to deacidify as acetobacter consumes the acetic acid it just produced and metabolizes it into water and carbon dioxide. You may observe a film or disc collecting on the surface of the vinegar. This is called the mother of vinegar, or mother for short. It's a mass of vinegar-making organisms that can be transferred to your next batch of vinegar as a starter. There is no need to be afraid of the mother. It is harmless and even edible. Vinegar may also contain solid blobs below the surface which are cast off from the mother of vinegar. You can either strain these out or consume them with your vinegar. Apple cider vinegar. In Chapter 10, I described the simplest alcohol fermentation process I know, leaving fresh apple cider to spontaneously ferment, producing hard cider in less than a week. If you leave that same jar on your counter for a couple weeks more, exposed to air, it will become apple cider vinegar just as spontaneously. You can help it along by transferring it into a wider container where its surface area and resulting flow of oxygen is increased. Another way to speed the process is to introduce as a starter a small portion of live unpasteurized vinegar from a previous batch or something commercially available, like Bragg's. Folk medicine of many traditions uses apple cider vinegar as a fortifying tonic. Even Hippocrates, the Greek physician, whose oath every contemporary American doctor must swear, prescribed vinegar as a remedy. Okay, so there's a Mexican pineapple vinegar, vinagre de piña. See, I do speak Spanish. Pineapple vinegar, or vinagre de piña, is delicious and super acidic. Many Mexican recipes call for pineapple vinegar, though you can use this in place of any kind of vinegar. Since this uses only the skin of the pineapple, you get to eat the pineapple flesh. This recipe was inspired by the recipe The Cuisines of Mexico by Diana Kennedy. And I'm just going to add a side note that if you mess up on your pineapple tepache, you can turn it into a pineapple vinegar. It takes 3 to 4 weeks, 2 tablespoons of sugar, and the peel of 1 pineapple, and some water. Shrub. Shrub is a refreshing soft drink that was popular in the United States prior to the availability of carbonated sodas. Traditionally, it was made by soaking fresh berries in vinegar for up to 2 weeks, then straining out the berries and adding sugar or honey. This concentrate was stored, diluted with water as needed, and served over ice. If you have fruity wine or cider vinegar, it's easier to just mix it with fruit juice. Try mixing 1 part vinegar to 3 parts fruit juice and 3 parts water. You can make it more soda-like by using seltzer in place of water. Just adjust proportions to taste. Sweet and sour flavors combine well. Fruit scrap vinegar. Ooh, fruit scrap vinegar. This sounds like something for a composter. Just as the peel of a pineapple makes delicious vinegar, so can any fruit scraps. Peels and cores from apple pie making, fallen bruised fruit, or the dregs of a bunch of grapes or berries. What's left after the finer specimens have been eaten? Vinegar is a recycling opportunity. Just pour sugar water, 2 tablespoons of sugar dissolved in 2 cups of water over the fruit, and proceed as for pineapple vinegar. You could use honey instead of sugar if you prefer, but the process might take a little longer. Switchel. Switchel is another vinegar-based soft drink, generally flavored with ginger. It can be sweetened by maple syrup, molasses, sorghum, honey, and or other sweeteners. Switchel is refreshing and energizing and has been associated with any hay harvests or other physical work requiring great stamina. Ooh, a switchel. Okay, I'm going to read this one. Time frame, 15 minutes. Ingredients. It calls for ginger, apple cider vinegar or other fruity vinegar, and maple syrup or a sweetener and water. Horseradish sauce. Horseradish is a potent root. When you eat it, its heat spreads from your mouth into your sinus cavity. I learned to love it on matzo as a kid, since it is used in the Passover Seder ritual to symbolize the bitterness of oppression. I still love it on matzo, but also on sandwiches and nori rolls, and in sauces, dressings, and kimchis. Horseradish sauce is pretty simple to prepare. First, grate fresh horseradish root finely. Whether you do this by hand or by machine, be aware that the fumes released as horseradish is grated are intense. Breathing it directly can be overwhelming, particularly as you open a sealed food processor. Salt grated horseradish. Pack it tightly. Cover with just a little vinegar and let it infuse for a few hours or a few weeks. Alternatively, you can ferment horseradish with a little honey or sugar water. Pour just a little sweetened water over grated horseradish, stir well, cover with a cheesecloth or mesh, and ferment for 3 to 4 weeks. This involves the horseradish in both the fermentation that creates alcohol from sugars and the fermentation that creates vinegar from alcohol. I like to think that the fermenting microorganisms are getting as much of a charge from the horseradish as I do. Infused vinegars. Vinegar's acidity makes it an effective solvent and preservative for extracting flavors and phytochemicals from foods and herbs. The flavors and medicinal compounds melt together into the vinegar. Depending on what you infuse, you'll have distinctive vinegar for salad dressings or potent plant medicine, or both. Place whatever it is you want to infuse into the vinegar in a jar. Cover with vinegar and put a top on the jar. Vinegar will make metal tops corrode, so use plastic or place a layer of waxed paper between the bottle and the metal lid. Leave the vinegar to infuse in a dark spot for a few weeks or longer. Strain the vinegar and discard the spent plant material. If the vinegar is light and you can see through it, place a fresh bit of whatever you infused into the vinegar when you bottle it. Put in a sleek bottle and give it as a gift. Food boutiques are full of gorgeous bottles of infused vinegars at premium prices. Here are a few ideas of foods and herbs to extract in vinegar: garlic, rosemary, thyme, tarragon, hot chili peppers, berries, mints, basil, dandelion roots, leaves, flowers, anything you'd like. Vinegar pickling. Dilly beans! Pickling food in vinegar is not a fermentation process. In brine pickling, covered in Chapter 5, vegetables are preserved by lactic acid, which is produced by the action of microorganisms on the vegetables. Vinegar pickling makes use of a fermented product, vinegar, but the acidity of the vinegar, along with the heat processing, prevents microorganism action. Vinegar pickles contain no live cultures. According to Terre Vivante, a French eco-education center focused on organic gardening and preservation of old world food preservation techniques, quote, pickles were always lacto-fermented in times past and then transferred to vinegar solely to stabilize them for commercial purposes, end quote. Indeed, the great advantage that vinegar pickling has over lacto-fermentation pickling is that vinegar pickles will last forever. Well, almost. While brined pickles will last for weeks or months, but rarely for years, and definitely not forever. Cookbooks are full of vinegar pickling recipes, and so I will just offer one. The dilly beans my father makes from his garden every summer and serves to his family and friends all year long. Time frame, 6 weeks. Equipment, Sealable canning jars. 1.5 pints or 750 milliliters size is best, as it's the perfect height to accommodate the string beans. Ingredients: string beans, garlic, salt. My dad swears by coarse kosher salt, but sea salt is fine too. Whole dried chili peppers, celery seed, fresh dill. The flowering tops are best, or leaves or seeds, and white distilled vinegar. Process: 1. Prepare the jars. Guesstimate how many jars you'll fill with the string beans you have. Thoroughly clean the jars and line them up. 2. Pack the jars. Into each jar, place 1 clove of garlic, 1 teaspoon salt, 1 whole red chili pepper, 1/4 teaspoon of celery seed, and a flowering dill top, small bunch of dill leaves, or 2 teaspoons dill seeds. Then fill the jar with beans standing on end, stuffing them as tightly as you can in the jar. 3. Prepare the vinegar solution. For each jar you have filled, measure 1 cup or 250 milliliters of vinegar and 1 cup of water. Boil the vinegar water solution and then pour it into the jars over the beans and spices to 1/2 inch or 1 centimeter from the top of the jar. 4. Heat process. Seal the jars and place them in a large pot of boiling water for a 10-minute heat processing. 5. Age. Leave the dilly beans for at least 6 weeks for the flavors to meld. Then open the jars as desired and enjoy. My father serves these dilly beans as an hors d'oeuvre. Heat processed pickles can be stored for years without refrigeration. Vinaigrette. This is my version of the classic salad dressing. It's the first thing my mother taught me to make, and my job as a child was to make it whenever we ate salad. My mother taught me to use at least as much vinegar as oil, lots of mustard, and lots of garlic. Salad dressing is easy. It always surprises me that people buy it prepared. And one of the interesting things he said in the recipe is that he likes to make his salad in the mustard jars because that helps get rid of all the mustard balls, or get them into the salad instead of them going to waste. And then he also says something that's interesting. If there's a pool of dressing when a salad is done, after you've made it before you've served it, put it back into the jar. Zero waste here.